In the quiet German village of Klingenberg am Main, nestled in the shadow of dense Bavarian forests, the story of Anneliese Michel began unassumingly. She was born in 1952 into a devout Roman Catholic family and grew up with a sense of purpose and faith deeply rooted in her life. Those who knew her described her as kind, intelligent, and eager to please. But under the surface, a storm was brewing. A storm that would soon pull her life, and those of everyone around her, into dark and terrifying waters. Anneliese's life began to take a disturbing turn during her late teenage years. One evening, without warning, her body stiffened uncontrollably, her muscles locking her in place. Her eyes rolled back, and her skin turned ashen as she fell into a violent seizure. Her family watched, horrified, as her body shook violently on the floor. The episode ended as suddenly as it had started, leaving Anneliese dazed and disoriented, but otherwise unhurt. The doctors she visited afterward diagnosed her with epilepsy, a treatable condition, but one that would mark the beginning of her tragic ordeal. For a few years, the medication seemed to work, helping to control the seizures and allowing her to return to something like normal life. But soon, the fits returned with increasing intensity, bringing with them far more frightening symptoms. Anneliese began to hear strange, insidious voices whispering to her at night, voices that grew louder and more hateful each time they returned. They taunted her, calling her worthless, evil, and damned. She was haunted by visions of grotesque, demonic faces in the shadows, faces that seemed to lurk at the edge of her consciousness, tormenting her. Her behavior began to change drastically. Anneliese, once kind and gentle, began to lash out at her family and friends. She started avoiding sacred objects, shying away from crosses and shrines as if they burned her skin. Her personality became erratic, and her actions grew increasingly bizarre. She would break into animalistic snarls and growls, tearing at her clothes, screaming profanities, and performing strange, contorted movements. Her family was beside themselves, watching helplessly as their daughter seemed to slip further and further away from them. Medical tests continued, with doctors struggling to understand her sudden transformation. Psychiatrists suggested schizophrenia, warning her family that these were classic signs of psychosis. Yet, despite the treatments they recommended, nothing seemed to break the hold these sinister forces had over her. Anneliese's faith, once a source of strength, was turning against her, twisting her mind into a place of profound terror. As her health and mental state deteriorated, her family grew desperate and turned to the church for help. They sought answers, and a local priest, Father Ernst Alt, took a particular interest in Anneliese's case. He visited her, observing her strange behaviors firsthand, and came to the chilling conclusion that she was possessed. Father Alt had trained in exorcism rites, and in his judgment, no mere mental illness could explain the terrifying transformation he witnessed. He believed dark, malevolent forces had taken root in her soul. After considerable hesitation and the submission of several official requests, the Catholic Church granted permission for the exorcism to be performed, a rare and drastic measure in modern times. Father Arnold Renz, a seasoned exorcist, joined Father Alt, and together they undertook the ritualistic exorcisms that would come to define Anneliese's final days. Over the next 10 months, Anneliese would undergo 67 grueling sessions of exorcism, each one lasting hours. During these rituals, she would speak in multiple voices, each identifying itself as a different demon: Nero, Cain, Judas, even Lucifer himself. Her voice would shift, low and guttural, sometimes seeming as though it were coming from somewhere else entirely. She would scream blasphemies, attacking the priests and fighting with a strength that belied her small frame. Anneliese, usually shy and frail, transformed into a feral, thrashing creature during the exorcisms, and the power she displayed was almost otherworldly. Her eyes would roll back as she laughed maniacally, taunting the priests, mocking their faith. The priests, though shaken, continued with the rites, believing that each session would bring Anneliese closer to freedom. But the demons within her only seemed to grow bolder. Anneliese would go into intense trances, shouting out things no one could explain, facts about the priests' private lives, secrets from the past that no one in the room could have known. She would snarl and bite at times speaking in languages she had never learned. As the exorcisms progressed, her body began to weaken. She refused food and water, convinced the demons would only leave her through extreme suffering. Her body, once lively and full of energy, had wasted away to skin and bone. The days blurred together in a haze of prayer, torment, and pain, each session pushing her closer to the edge. Her family remained steadfast by her side, horrified but unable to abandon hope that she would be saved. Yet the Anneliese they loved was slipping further and further away, replaced by something monstrous. The priests, too, began to feel the weight of the battle, wondering if they had underestimated the power they were confronting. Then, one fateful night, after a particularly harrowing session, Anneliese finally looked at her mother with exhausted eyes and whispered, "Mother, I'm afraid." Her mother held her close, whispering reassurances, but they both knew that the darkness had already taken root too deeply. Anneliese's body was a prison, and she was trapped within it, fighting a losing battle against forces that defied understanding. On the morning of July 1st, 1976, Anneliese Michel's frail, tortured body finally gave out. She died in her sleep, her body so emaciated that it resembled that of a famine victim. The family was devastated, but the priest believed that in death, Anneliese's soul had finally been freed from the horrors that had plagued her. Her death sent shockwaves through the village and quickly drew national attention. Authorities launched an investigation into the circumstances, leading to the eventual arrest of her parents and the two priests involved. In the courtroom, doctors argued that Anneliese had suffered from severe mental illness, that her condition could have been treated with appropriate medical intervention. They claimed that the exorcisms had only fed her delusions, worsening her suffering and leading her to refuse food and water. The priests, however, maintained that they had acted out of faith and necessity, attempting to save her soul from demonic torment. The trial became a flashpoint, igniting debates about faith, mental illness, and medical neglect. The jury ultimately found the priests and Anneliese's parents guilty of negligent homicide, though they were given suspended sentences, sparking anger and controversy across the country. For some, Anneliese's death symbolized the dangers of religious fervor and the neglect of medical treatment. For others, it was a haunting reminder of the mysterious and unexplainable forces that sometimes breach our reality. In the years since her death, people continue to visit Anneliese's grave, leaving flowers and prayers. Some believe that she was truly possessed, that she suffered as a martyr fighting forces beyond human comprehension. Others dismiss her story as a cautionary tale of untreated mental illness and tragic neglect. But no matter what one believes, the story of Anneliese Michel leaves a lingering chill, a haunting reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the terrifying darkness that sometimes lurks just out of sight. To this day, her story remains one of the most controversial and unsettling cases of possession, leaving a question that echoes through time. Was Anneliese Michel truly haunted by dark forces, or was she merely a victim of a more human kind of horror?